Okay, so the first thing that we have to do is we have to configure a scene. So we start with our scene. So I've just completely started a new 3D project with the main rendering pipeline because we don't need anything else. I added the mesh that I included, or the model that I included of the clock that was free. And basically I pointed the camera to it. So you can see now that the camera is actually pointed to it. So we can see the clock, which is very good. So the clock has two things, and well, obviously if you use any model, you do need the clock to have these. So it has a body here, which is nice, and then it has an hour hand and a minute hand. So the hour hand is set up properly so it can be rotated around the origin point, which is here in the middle. So if I rotate it, you can see that it does move as expected. The minute hand does the same thing. So it does move as expected. So I know that these are set up properly for my project and for what I want to actually achieve. Good. So now the next thing that we have to do is we're going to go here and we're going to add a new script to it. So I'm going to say script, and I'm going to call it clock controller, because why not? Cool. And now I'm going to open it on Visual Studio or whatever you're using. And I'll wait for it to open. Cool. So we need a few things to start with. The first thing is we do need to know what our hands are. So the minute hand and the hour hand. So we do need to store either the game object somewhere as a reference, or well, we could just use the transform, but I'll use the game object. So just to be a bit more professional, I'll just say header, and here I'll say hands. And this is nice when you're using the editor, when you're passing parameters in the editor, or you're passing variables in the editor, you want to keep things nice and tidy. So we're starting with a minute hand, and we're going to make another one that is also game object, not max hand, but hour hand. Cool. Then we're going to have some other options for movement, but for now I'm going to not do this. I'll say to do add options. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is, well, obviously we want to display time and we want to display the current time. So we do need to somehow get that time from the computer, or from the operating system in this case. So I'm going to say, first of all, here private. So there's something called system.datetime, and that kind of works, I found, pretty well. And I'm going to call it time. So this is a datetime object, and this has to be included. So if I go here to potential fixes, oh, it says datetime. Cool. Perfect. So that's all we need, really. So time is basically a date time object, and that has all the information that we need. The other thing that I will say is, because of how I found, at least with this object, that with a specific model of a clock, I kind of struggled to figure out exactly how to do constant rotations if I didn't reset the rotation every single time. And the point is, the best way I found to do this is to reset its rotation and then apply the new rotation based on what time it is. So here we're going to store two floats that are going to give us the amount of rotation of the minute hand and the hour hand that we had in the previous frame. So we're going to say previous rotations, or previous frame rotations, and it's going to be two private floats. I'm going to call it prev min rot, and it's going to be initialized to 0, and then private float prev hour rot, also initialized to 0. Cool. Now we're going to go into the start, and the only thing that we're going to do here is get the start time. So I'm going to say get starting time, and I'm going to say time So this variable that we created here, we want to initialize it. So we're going to say system.datetime.now, and it will get the current date time, which is perfect. We don't really need to do this technically because we're going to be doing this anyway on the top of every frame, but it's nice to have things initialized. So now to the update. Obviously, this is where everything will happen. So we start with always, well, for every single frame, we want to get the new time. So we're going to say update time. So this time object needs to be updated, or this datetime object needs to be updated. And it's exactly the same function, believe it or not, just now. Cool. Then, obviously, we need to update the rotations of these objects. So I'm going to say update rotations, and this is where this is going to happen. So how are we going to do this? Well, first of all, we need to kind of think about how this should work. And then I'm going to split this. I'm going to start with the hour hand because the hour hand is kind of easy, right? Because the hour hand doesn't really have a lot of values that it can have. I mean, they're all numbered on the clock, so it's easy to figure out exactly where you want to be every single time. If it's 3 o'clock, you want this to be at 3. So we're just going to start with this one. Okay, so we start with getting the hour. Obviously, the hour is going to be an integer, right? I mean, it cannot be 12.3. So how do we do this? Well, we're going to say int, because it is going to be an int. And I'm going to call it nice hour here, because I like the name of the variable. And the reason why I'm calling it nice hour is you're going to get a value from basically 0 to 23, I think. That means that we do need to properly set this up. So I'm going to do this with here a nice ternary operator. So if you haven't seen the ternary operator before, it looks like this. So instead of writing an if statement, I can say, well, int nice hour is equal to, and here I put my condition in the first parentheses. So my conditional has been checked. So I'm going to say here time, which is our time object or datetime object, dot hour. And obviously, if it's larger or equal to 12, I want to have it not be that, because I don't want it, there is no 13 on the clock. So I do want it to be a value from basically 0 to 11. So if it's larger or equal to 12, I'm going to say here, then I'm using this question mark, which means that if this statement in the parentheses is true, then this thing immediately following it, like immediately following the question mark, will happen. So that's going to be times hour. And how do we convert this? You know, if we have a 23, for example, how do we convert it to real time? We just subtract 12, right? So that's all we need to do. For example, if it is 23, we obviously want it to be 11 o'clock on the clock. So all we do is subtract 12. Cool. And this colon allows me to say, okay, if this statement is not true, then this one is the value that this variable is going to take. So it's going to take the normal value of time.hour. So this will give us exactly the number that we want to achieve. That's the number that we want to be at when we apply the rotation. Cool. But then the question becomes, what is the rotation that we're applying to the hour hand? We're going to start with a simple implementation of this, and we're going to actually extend it to a more realistic, I would say, for most clocks implementation. The reason is many clocks have this sweeping function. So most clocks, I think, do use sweeping. So that means that when this hand rotates, it will not, well, when it's 1 o'clock, it will be here, but when it's 1:30, it will be halfway through. So it keeps moving instead of just jumping from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, etc. For now, we're going to have this jumping thing, and then we're going to see how we can actually give the option to the developer or whoever is using our asset to actually have a sweeping movement. So, well, what's the rotation? We're going to call it hour rot. And the thing that we're going to say here is very, very simply, how do you know what the rotation is? Right? Well, that is kind of easy to figure out. So you have a clock, and the clock, no matter what, has, well, it's a clock, so it's a circle. And the circle is 360 degrees, right? So I have, basically, that's how much of a sweep I can make. And, okay, well, how many values do I have? So how much do I need to split the circle? So if I'm talking about the circle here, how much do I need to split it? So you can kind of see it, like how many parts you have. So if you say this is 360, all you have to do is split it in 12 values, right? So if you do this, obviously you come up with 30, because 360 over 12 is 30. So now that we know this, we can just say, okay, well, if I am a 12, so that's 0 because of how we designed this, because if it is 12, it's going to go to 12 minus 12 is going to be 0. Then it's going to be, well, 30 has to be at 0, right? So no rotation at all. So that means that's perfect. What if it's at 1? Well, I want 30 degrees of rotation. What if it's at 2? Then I want 60. And obviously, I want to have like a complete square rotation when I have when I'm at 3 o'clock. When I'm at 6 o'clock, I want it to be 180 degrees, right? So you kind of see that all we have to say here is we have to take our nice hour integer and multiply it by 30. And that is it. And we will actually test this. So one thing, like I said before, because of weird things that happen, I found that it is better to actually basically apply the opposite of the previous rotation so that you can reset the clock before applying the new rotation rather than applying whatever you're going to apply. So basically what we're going to do here is first apply that previous rotation, which in the beginning is going to be nothing, obviously, but so here we're going to apply it. We're going to say transform. So obviously we take the game object, our hand, we take its transform component, and we're going to say rotate, because that's the function that we like to use. And these are Euler angles. So I'm going to say 0.0f because I don't care about the x-axis. I don't care about the y-axis either, but I do care about the z. Because remember, if we go here, this is the one that we're rotating at, right? This is x, this is y. The z is the one that we want to rotate around. So this one is going to be first minus previous hour rotation. So we reset the clock by doing this. After the clock is reset, we take this one. Obviously, you could do both rotations as one rotation, but it really, I don't think makes a difference. So yeah, I think this is better explained. You could obviously just kind of apply both rotations at the same time. And here we're going to say hour rotation. Cool. And then we obviously have to go down here and actually update our previous hour rotation, which is now going to be hour rotation. Cool. So now let's run it to see whether it actually works. So it is 251, so it should be at 2. Let's be a bit smarter as well. So here, let's go and say, if our hand is null, debug.error, log error, our hand not set. Debug.log error, and minute hand not set. Cool. So, okay. Well, we obviously have to go here. Where did I put the controller? Ooh, that's not the right place. It doesn't really matter, obviously. However, I am going to copy the component and actually put it here because that's where it's supposed to be. And I'm going to remove it from here. Okay, cool. So now we're going to move the hour hand here, and we're going to move our minute hand here. Perfect. So now if I run this, I should be able to get, you can see the clock is pointing at 2. And if I wait a little bit, like a 5-6 minutes, it's going to go to 3. So that works as intended, and we're going to keep it for now like this. So it's going to snap. This is obviously not a real problem because it doesn't really matter too much for immersion purposes, except if your clock has to be there for a long time in the game. You always look at it, and you also kind of, you make it part of the game, so the player will always look at it, and the longevity of the game will allow the clock to actually change values a lot, so the duration of the gameplay. But that's fine. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go down here, and, well, we have a minute hand, so we have to figure out what to do with a minute hand. And what I will do is I will do it above here, because why not? So we don't have anything. So the minute hand is a bit different because we don't have those those nice rotation stuff. We don't have to say we're not going to have a value of 23, but in reality it means 11. Whatever this gives us, so this time dot min gives us, dot minute actually gives us, that's the value that we have to use. So right away we're going to say min rotation, so things are perhaps a bit simpler. Cool, but what's the value, right? Obviously it's going to have something to do with time dot minute, which gives us the current minute. And that is obviously going to be a value from 0 to 59. Okay. So how do we do this? Before we multiplied something by 30. So if you remember before, we took the value that we had and we multiplied it by 30. So you might think, well, I'm obviously now going to take this minute thing, obviously I have to use it, and I'm going to multiply it by something else to get the right rotation. Well, if we look at the clock, it is kind of similar to before. And you can think about it by thinking in your head, what would the rotation be if I had specific minute values? If I was here, so I had 15 minutes, my rotation would have to be 90 degrees, right? Very simply, we are again dividing our circle. So we have 360 degrees that we have to divide. This is the whole circle of the clock face. But now we don't have the same values as before. Before we had only 12 values. So we divided it by 12. Now we have to divide it by 60. If we divide it by 60, we get 6, because 6 times 60 is obviously 360. And that's how we think about it. So how much do I need to actually divide my clock down so that I can apply the rotations? So I need to divide it for 60 values, then I get a 6. So all I have to do is multiply it by 6. And I will do exactly the same thing here. I'll say min hand dot transform dot rotate. And again, obviously, we only care about one rotation. Here, we're going to first apply the previous min rotation, and then we're going to apply the new rotation, just to keep it nice and simpler. And that's it. And here, I'll go down and update my prev min rotation, which is going to be min rotation. Okay, so now I can run this. Obviously, that has to be minus. And so I'm applying the previous rotation or the opposite of it, and now to reset it, and now I'm applying that. So now you can see that that works. It's 59, and that's where this is. It's at 2, and that's at 50. So if I wait for a little bit, which I'm going to do for the purposes of this demonstration, because it is almost 3 p.m., obviously, this is not going to be a sweeping movement. This is going to be very abrupt, which we're going to fix after. Because generally, you get sweeping for the minutes, you get sweeping for the hours as well. But I think it does depend on the clock. So you kind of get the idea now, and that's all you have to do. You can do the same thing for seconds as well, right? You would do, and again, you have 60 possible values, so you have to split your 360-degree clock face, or area of the clock face, do that. And now you saw it, it did it. And now it's at 3, and that's at 12. So it works. Cool. However, to just do this a little bit better and to make it a bit more nice, and if we're creating something for, you know, someone just tells you, okay, well, I need a clock for my game, or we need to have a real-time clock because that's nice and people like it and it's kind of a cool thing, or it's an Easter egg, or it's very important, it doesn't matter. You want to create something that gives people options. So you want things to be modular when you create things. So what we're going to do to actually achieve that is we're going to go here. Well, we said we want to make it sweeping. So let's give it some options here. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to say header. And I'm going to say options. Okay. And I will actually use the tooltip here for a few reasons. So if you type tooltip here, it will actually, I'll show you what it does after I write it because that's easier. So I'm going to say continuous hour hand movement, and we'll actually implement them one by one. And I'll have a public Boolean continuous hour, and it's going to be false by default. So what this does, in case you don't know, is it gives me this nice thing where if I hover over this, it will actually give me this message underneath, and it will say continuous hour hand movement. So it will actually explain to someone that's using my script what exactly this is, because sometimes it may not be clear. In this case, it kind of is, but for the purposes of demonstration, we may as well write it. And we're going to do the same exact thing for the minute hand. So we're going to say continuous minute hand movement, and I'm going to say public bool. Man, the autocomplete stuff is really not doing a good job, is it? Main false. Cool. So now we have our options, but what do we do with them, right? All of this will stay the same, and so let's think about, I would say, let's try first with the hour hand because it may be a bit more apparent. Sure, let's start with the hour hand. So the interesting thing about the hour hand is it is the one that is the most abrupt. The minute hand is not that visible. It may be depending on how big your clock face is. So if you actually have a big enough gap between, you know, how some clock faces have dots that represent each of the values between the hours. So between 0 and 5, and then 5 to 10. If you have these and there's a big gap between these dots, then you will for sure be able to tell whether the minute hand is snapping between the dots or not, or just sweeping through them normally. But it's kind of hard to tell. For the hour hand, however, things get a bit more complicated because it is very likely that it's going to be very apparent. Like you saw before, it just snapped from 12 or from 2 to 3, and it just immediately went from here to here. And that's not clocks don't really work that way. So let's start with the hour hand because we immediately go, well, that's not good enough. So our nice hour is set. That's the value that we want. So that's not going to change. We're going to be based, though, on that. So our hour hand, our rotation here, before was nice hour times 30. So let's think about it a little bit and go, well, how much more what kind of rotation do we need? We need more rotation, first of all, right? We never need less rotation. If it's 2, so if this nice hour is at 3, like it is now, we need a bit more rotation. We'll never need less rotation. Okay, so that means that we have to add something to it. Obviously, this is going to be our basis, right? We were always going to have nice hour times 30. Always. That's going to be where we start. And then we add something else. And to make this a bit better, we're going to use, again, ternary operator and go continuous hour. So if this is set to true, then we're going to have our new value. Else, we're going to have this previous nice hour times 30 that we had. So here we have to figure out what the new value actually is. Obviously, it's going to start with nice hour times 30, right? And we said we're going to add something to it. So we have our basis and we add some more rotation. How much more rotation do we add, though? Well, one way to figure this out is to think, okay, what is a clear position or a clear situation or state of the clock where I can think about the exact values I want to have here. So if I am, for some reason, well, it's 3 now, but what if it's 3:30? If it's 3:30, our rotation is going to be, well, before it was going to be 90 degrees, right? So this is going to be 3 times 30, so that's 90 degrees. But if it's 3:30, so for 3, but if it's 3:30, how much rotation do I add? Well, I have to be halfway between, well, 90 and 90 plus 30. The minutes are the indication of how much our hour needs to be rotated more. So how much more of a rotation we need to add. So if I say here time dot minute, obviously I will use this in some way. But how exactly am I using it? If I take the minutes here and it's 30, then I need a 15-degree rotation. So that's 30 over 2, right? And that is exactly what you need. Basically, you take your minutes and you add half of that. And that really does work. And you will see what this looks like. Actually, we need to set it first. I am wondering now whether it's going to be visible. It should be a little bit visible. Yep. So now you can see that we have actually moved. So we're slowly moving our hour hand away from 3 and towards 4 based on the minute hand, which is exactly what we wanted. And that really does work because we are taking the minutes into account. By the way, the reason why we divided over 2, well, the explanation with the 30, if it's 3:30, then obviously you need 15 degrees. Kind of, you might figure it out that way. But the reason is, it's the relationship between the minutes and the hours. So if we have, for example, 30 minutes, we need 30 of these we need 2 of these 30 minutes to have a full hour. So to jump basically to the next hour exactly on the clock. And that's why we divide it over 2. So it's all about the relationship between the hands. Okay, so we have our minute hand, our hour hand. So now we have to do the same for the minute hand because there it's also going to be likely visible. It's going to be more visible here, but we may as well do this here because it's more fun. So we're going to follow exactly the same strategy. We're going to say continuous hour, or continuous minute with our ternary operator. And if we have, well, disabled continuous minute, it's going to be this, which we created before. Else it's going to be, well, if it's enabled, then it's going to be our new one. And obviously, again, like before, we start from our basis. So our basic rotation, which is time.minute times 6, or minute times 6, like we explained before. And obviously, again, we're going to add something to this. Well, the hours were based on the minutes, right? So the extra rotation that we needed was based on the minutes. For the minutes, in our case now, we need to be based on the seconds. So you might go, well, I'm obviously going to be based on the seconds. I'm going to say time, and that does indeed give me seconds. So I can just say seconds. And then the question is, how much of that do you add, right? And again, you can just go, well, how much do I divide my space and my clock? So if from here to here, I am moving, this is 30 degrees. And so it's 30 degree intervals for the hour, but for the minute hand, it's 6 degree intervals. So every time, depending on the minute, I'm moving 6 degrees, right? Okay, so to explain this, remember that we're moving every time 6 degrees, right? We're moving 6 degrees. Why? Because it's time minute times 6. So we take our value, and every time we move 6 degrees, we either move 0 degrees, 0 times 6 degrees, or whatever the minutes are. So it's all 6 degree intervals. So if I want to go between a 6-degree interval, when I want to be halfway through between a 6-degree interval. So if for whatever reason, if it's 12 here, but the seconds hand, so the minute hand is at 12 because we have 0 minutes because it's a clock, whatever clock. And the minute hand underneath, the seconds hand underneath is at 30. Then I want to be halfway between 0 and 1. So I want to be halfway between 0-degree rotation and a 6-degree rotation. So I want to be at 3-degree rotation. That's all I need. I need to add 3 degrees to my rotation. So how do I do this? If I take, well, I have 30 seconds, right? That's where I am. The seconds are at 30. So if I divide 30 by 10, then that gives me a 3, which is exactly what I need. And consequently, this works for every single kind of minute that you have. So every single second that you have, every minute that you have, any position that you have, any state, it actually obviously works. Because that's how a clock works. It's a linear thing. It doesn't change the way it behaves based on the minutes or seconds. It's all very, very linear, all very predictable. So if I take this now, and I'm obviously adding, well, time.second something, but this I divide by 10, then it will give me exactly the value that I want. Okay, so let's test this. So we're gonna set the hour to the continuous minutes flag on, and we're gonna start our game. So you'll see now that surprisingly these are both in the same position, but basically we are at 3:16, and you see the minute hand just moved, and it will keep moving and sweeping through. And you'll see now it actually is moving between values. But yeah, you can see that it absolutely does work, and now it's a lot better than it was before, right? We are at 17, we are moving towards halfway there, and that's also a continuous thing. And that's it. Okay, so one note is this time second over 10 thing is going to be an integer division, the way it's written now, which is not what we want. So we're going to switch it to a 10.0f, and now it's going to be actually a floating point division. And this makes a very big difference because when I run this, what it will do is it will actually sweep properly the way I want to, as opposed to just in intervals of 10 seconds because it was divided over 10. It was divided by 10. So now what you see is it's a lot smoother, and it's going to provide you with this nice sweeping motion that you actually desire. Yeah. You can kind of see it too. Unfortunately, this clock does not have a seconds hand. Obviously, if you have a seconds hand, all you will need to do is just... So, well, just to obviously, you probably have already figured this out, but if you go here, you would just say float, sec rotation, and you would literally say time.second. And because it works exactly like our minutes work, we only multiply it by 6, and we're done. And obviously, we have nothing else to sweep through it. It's only going to be a rotation from, you know, it's going to be 6 intervals of 6-degree rotations. And that's it. So if you wanted to add a seconds hand, that's all you would need to do. So you can see how simple this code actually is, and you can now actually understand, hopefully, how this comes to be. And it is really kind of thinking, you know, that's how you do problem solving in general. You go, well, in these situations, it's kind of clear to me what I would have to do to achieve what I want. So how can I generalize this? And in this case, you can see how easy it actually is. Okay, that was it. See you in the next tutorial.